This screencast is on Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, Christabel. Let's look at the poetic style of this poem. When you first look at it, the meter seems irregular. Can you find any pattern? Listen. "'Tis the middle of the night by the castle clock, and the owls have awakened the crowing cock. To wit, to woo, and hark again the crowing cock, how drowsily it crew." When we've looked at meter before, we've always gone by the number of syllables in each line, but this poem doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason. Each line appears to have a different number of syllables. Actually, Coleridge is trying something different with his poem, creating the lines based upon the number of accents rather than on the number of syllables. Listen to the accents. I'll exaggerate them a little so that you can hear them more easily. "'Tis the middle of the night by the castle clock, and the owls have awakened the crowing cock. To wit, to woo, and hark again the crowing cock, how drowsily it crew." How many accents are on each line? If you count them, you'll find that there are 4. This is a pretty radical departure from more traditional poetry that always contained a consistent syllable count throughout the poem. Enough of the poetic form. Let's get down to the poem itself. What is going on in this poem? It might help to do a little plot summary. The poem begins at night. In fact, it is the night when Christabel first discovers Geraldine. Coleridge is setting the stage for us here. It is a chilly night in April. There's a full moon somewhat obscured by thin clouds. It's gothic. It's very dark and kind of threatening. Christabel is in the woods praying for her fiancé, a knight who is far away. She discovers a woman. Let's back up. She discovers a woman under a huge oak tree and asks her how she came to be here in these woods. The lady answers her, and this is a long quote, but it's well worth paying attention to. Quote, "My sire is of a noble line, and my name is Geraldine. 5 warriors seized me yestermorn, even me, a maid forlorn. They choked my cries with force and fright, and tied me on a palfrey white. The palfrey," by the way, a palfrey is a horse, "was as fleet as wind, and they rode furiously behind. They spurred amain, their steeds were white, and once we crossed the shade of night, as sure as heaven shall rescue me, I have not thought what men they be, nor do I know how long it is, for I have lain entranced, I wis. Since one, the tallest of the 5, took me from the palfrey's back, a weary woman scarce alive. Some muttered words his comrades spoke. He placed me underneath this oak. He swore they would return with haste. Whither they went, I cannot tell." Think about her situation. Some strong men abducted her, tied her to a horse, and brought her here to these woods where they dumped her. Why would they do that, do you think? Obviously, she wasn't sexually molested, and they must not want to hold her for ransom since no one is here guarding her. What then does it make you think? Maybe they were just trying to get rid of her. There are lots of hints that Christabel is in trouble. First, Geraldine has to be carried across the threshold. They crossed the moat, and Christabel took the key that fitted well a little door she opened straight, all in the middle of the gate that was ironed within and without, where an army in battle array had marched out. The lady sank belike through pain, and Christabel with might and main lifted her up a weary weight over the threshold of the gate. Then the lady rose again and moved as she were not in pain. There's an old saying that trouble can't enter a house on its own, that it has to be carried in. And if you think about it, that's exactly what Christabel has done here. Another hint that Geraldine is trouble is that she won't or can't pray to the Virgin Mary. So free from danger, free from fear, they crossed the coat, right glad they were, and Christabel devoutly cried to the lady by her side, "Praise we the Virgin all divine, who hath rescued thee from thy distress." "Alas, alas," said Geraldine, "I cannot speak for weariness." You'd think that Christabel would start getting the hint. I mean, even the dog was sensing evil. Outside her kennel the mastiff old lay fast asleep in moonshine cold. The mastiff old did not awake, yet she an angry moan did make, and what can ail the mastiff bitch? And finally we get the best hint of all. They passed the hall that echoes still, pass as lightly as you will. The brands were flat, the brands were dying, amid their own white ashes lying. But when the lady passed there came a tongue of light, a fit of flame. In other words, as Geraldine walks along the hallway, the torches that line the hall flare up, each one as she passes them. I would think that most of us would take a hint from that. As Christabel takes Geraldine to her bedroom, even the ghost of Christabel's mother tries to defend her. In Christabel's room, the two women get ready for bed, and thus the lofty lady spake, "All they who live in the upper sky do love you, holy Christabel, and you them. And you love them, and for their sake, and for the good which me befell, even I in my degree will try, fair maiden, to requite you well. But now unrobe yourself, for I must pray, ere yet in bed I lie." Of course Geraldine tells her that she must pray, but of course she doesn't. "So," quoth Christabel, "so let it be." And as the lady bade, did she her gentle limbs did she undress, and lay down in her loveliness. But through her brain of weal and woe so many thoughts moved to and fro, that vain it were her lids to close. So halfway on her bed she rose, and on her elbow did recline, to look at the Lady Geraldine. Christabel can't sleep, so she's up on her elbow here, watching Geraldine undress. Beneath the lamp the lady bowed, and slowly rolled her eyes around. Then drawing in her breath aloud, like one that shuddered, she unbound the cincture from beneath her breast. Her silken robe, the inner vest, dropped to her feet, and full in view behold her bosom and half her side. A sight to dream of, not to tell. Oh, shield her, shield sweet Christabel. It's as though Geraldine really doesn't want to do what she's going to do. Yet Geraldine nor speaks nor stirs. Ah, what a stricken look was hers! Deep from within she seems halfway to lift some weight with sick assay, and eyes the maid and seeks delay. Then suddenly, as one defied, collects herself in scorn and pride, and lay down by the maiden's side, and in her arms the maid she took. Ah, well a day! She makes up her mind to do what she came for, and lays down in bed with Christabel. And then we come to the conclusion of part one of the poem, where something important appears to be happening. With open eyes, ah, woe is me, asleep and dreaming fearfully. This is a big clue to my interpretation of this poem. Christabel's asleep, but her eyes are open. Think about what that could mean to a guy like Coleridge. Fearfully dreaming, yet I wis, dreaming that alone, which is, oh sorrow and shame, can this be she, the lady who knelt at the old oak tree? And lo, the worker of these harms that holds the maiden in her arms seems to slumber still and mild as a mother with her child. Geraldine, on the other hand, is sleeping like a baby. A star hath set, a star hath risen, O Geraldine, since arms of thine have been the lovely lady's prison. Geraldine's arms aren't a shelter to Christabel, but are instead a prison. The two women lay in this embrace for about an hour or so. O Geraldine, 1 hour was thine, thou'dst had thy will by tarn and rill. The night birds all that hour were still, but now they are jubilant anew, from cliff and tower, to woo, to woo, to woo, to woo, from wood and fell. Eventually Christabel comes out from under Geraldine's spell. And see, the Lady Christabel gathers herself from out her trance. Her limbs relax, her countenance grows sad and soft, the smooth thin lids close o'er her eyes, and tears she sheds, large tears that leave the lashes bright, and off the one she seems to smile as infants at a sudden light. She's crying and smiling all at the same time. Some scholars would say that the two women just had a lesbian encounter and that Christabel is feeling happy and guilty at the same time. Others would say that this is more supernatural, maybe the tale of a vampire. I don't agree with either of these groups because I think the spell is something far more literal than that. In part 2, we are introduced to Christabel's father, Sir Leoline, who wakes up every day to realize that his wife is dead, and so experiences her loss as keenly as he did the first time. This reminds me so much of Hrethel and Beowulf, who mourned every morning for the loss of his son. Geraldine sees this sadness as her opportunity to get to Leoline, and after her encounter with Christabel, Geraldine is more beautiful than ever. Okay, it's time to just come out and tell you my interpretation of this text. Now remember, this is my interpretation, not necessarily the correct one. I think that Geraldine represents opium, and that Coleridge is writing about his opium addiction in this poem. Once Christabel takes opium the first time, she finds it more appealing. As for Leoline, we are told that he knew Roland, Geraldine's father. In my interpretation, that would be indicating that Leoline had suffered an addiction of his own earlier in life. He said that he never got over the loss of Roland's friendship. In other words, he knew that he still wanted the drug. When he meets Geraldine, he embraces her. So he has once again fallen into addiction. Christabel sees them embrace and suddenly sees Geraldine for what she is. I would interpret this as someone who is taking drugs, thinking that everything was fine, until they saw someone they loved taking the same drugs. It would put it all into perspective, and they could see the drugs for what they were. It doesn't take long, though, before Christabel is back under Geraldine's spell. We also have Bracy's dream. Oops, back up. Which I think is really symbolic to what is happening to Christabel. And in my dream, methought I went to search out what might there be found, in other words, in the woods, and what the sweet bird's trouble meant, that thus lay fluttering on the ground. I went and peered and could descry no cause for her distressful cry, but yet, for her dear lady's sake, I stooped, methought, the dove to take, when lo, I saw a bright green snake coiled around its wings and neck. Like in the Garden of Eden, this snake is the great tempter. The bird, of course, is Christabel, and the snake is Geraldine. So as she watches Geraldine with her father, Christabel sees Geraldine for the snake that she really is. A snake's small eyes blink dull and shy. In the lady's eyes they shrink in her head, each shrunk up to a serpent's eye, and with somewhat of malice and more of dread at Christabel she looked askance. But before she can say anything, Christabel herself takes on the snake-like qualities of Geraldine. Once again she is under Geraldine's spell, or under the spell of the drug. After she comes out of her trance, she pleads with her father to send Geraldine away, probably, if you think about it, in much the same way that she arrived in the woods at the beginning of the poem. But Leoline turns his back on Christabel and succumbs to his addiction. I think that what Coleridge is doing here is employing a conceit, such as we would find in the metaphysical poems of Donne or Marvell. Geraldine is an extended metaphor for Coleridge's opium addiction. Now, as I said, this is just my interpretation of the poem, but I think that it really works. Take a look at the conclusion on page 1649. Doesn't it seem like he's talking about himself here? So, you've heard my interpretation of the poem. It may or may not be yours. If you come up with something different, I am happy to hear your ideas because I think this poem is just really, well, swell. Thank you.